Well, yesterday I showed you how I went about teaching kids to write verse, and how I write verse myself. One thing I left out, I put it up here. When I would want a line out of the class, I would tell the kids, now if you think you've got a line, just silently raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. If I didn't do that, as soon as someone starts to speak, it disturbs the beat. And I remember I told the kids too, don't try to do this while you're listening to music or television or something, because, especially music, because that has a beat of its own. You have to set the beat up in your head. All right, well anyway, that was yesterday. A limerick. I might have shown you this already. It is a form, a limerick. It's a very strict form, and it's got to be three beats, and then 2 lines of 2 beats, then one of 3 beats. And they very often start, there once was a da-da-da-da-da, there once was a woman from Spain, or something like that. There once was a woman from Spain who da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, it might have a feminine ending, or maybe not. There are many limericks. They seem to lend themselves to humor. Now, a sonnet is quite another matter. Sonnets are, each one of these is a little bit harder. A sonnet is quite a difficult form. There are 14 lines, and I laid the whole thing out because I wanted to show you the rhyme scheme. Now this is an English sonnet. This is the kind of sonnet that Shakespeare wrote. There are other forms of sonnets, but this is the kind that I rather like. Iambic pentameter, so basically 14 lines, you've got 140 syllables to get your thought across. It's that tight. Now, here and there you could have an extra syllable maybe, but Shakespeare usually did it in his sonnets. The rhyme scheme, A-B-A-B, that's called the first quatrain, 4 lines. Then C-D-C-D, E-F-E-F, and then at the end there's a rhyming couplet, it's called G-G. I think of sonnets in a way like an idealized paragraph. I hate it when teachers teach about topic sentences and first support and second support or whatever, and then a clincher at the end of this ideal paragraph. I really detest that kind of teaching. I mean, there's certain paragraphs that works for, but it certainly doesn't work very well for narrative paragraphs. Anyway, a sonnet is like an ideal one in a sense, and here's the clincher at the end. I'm going to quote 2 sonnets. Well, what you basically need to do in a sonnet is, to write a sonnet, is separate your thought into 3 pieces and deal with deal with each piece of the thought within a quatrain. And then and I always would wait until you've written all that before you do the rhyming couplet at the end, because who knows where you'll be by the time you get down there. I haven't written a sonnet in many, many years. As a matter of fact, I haven't written very much verse in many, many years. But in my life, I've written some sonnets. I might have written a dozen. I'm working on one right now. I want to write a sonnet about this friend that I haven't spoken about in quite a while, this friend that I've met online, a woman in Germany, and she has been so helpful to me. But it's taking me a long time to figure out just how do I want to go about explaining it. I'll worry about the verse once I have my idea. See, this is so much harder because it's not a ditty. This isn't just whatever, it can be stupid. No, with sonnets you usually have a thought and you care about the thought. Now by putting it in verse, you sort of make it immortal, if you can pull it off. Anyway, I'm going to quote 2 sonnets. The first one is by Shakespeare. He wrote 154, I believe. One famous one starts, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" That's very often used in schools. Another one that I've taught before is, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. And he goes on to explain when he's really down, "Haply I think on thee," but then he thinks about the person he loves. And Well, anyway, here's the Shakespearean sonnet. They usually don't have names. They go by their opening lines or by number. I think this is Sonnet 73, and I think I can quote it. I may stumble, but I think I can quote it. In each quatrain, there's a simile, and I don't think I want to. I mean, I'll sit where you can see that if you choose to while I'm reciting it, but here we go. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or few, or none, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the ending of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire as on the ashes of its youth doth lie, as the deathbed on where it must expire, consumed by that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. Now I'm sorry I stumbled at that one spot, but my interpretation of it, I don't know if it's necessary or not. I imagine that some old person speaking to some young person that loves him or her and sees that three ways of explaining that the old person can see that the young person sees him like trees that have lost their leaves, like the end of a day, like a fire that's burned out. I love that line, consumed by what it was nourished by. That's the line that I messed up. The fire burned so hot, but that's what consumed it, and now it's ashes. Becomes this deathbed. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. Wonderful poem. That's my favorite of Shakespeare's sonnets. Well, the other poem I'm going to quote is one by Diderot, or I call it Diderot. It's mine. I wrote it, and I don't want to explain it too much because I think a poem really shouldn't have to have an explanation. But you probably don't know who Diderot was. Denis Diderot. He was a French. He organized illustrators right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. He had all this encyclopedia of the trades and industry done. And for example, here's a drawing of a blast furnace as it was. I don't know if you can see with the camera. Later on, I think I'm going to show you this a little bit better. There's forging an anchor. Well, I will show you that the blast furnace was powered by a water wheel. I'm kind of fond of that. All right, anyway, Diderot. Here's my sonnet. It's not iambic, it's anapestic, but it does have 14 lines and the rhyme scheme is right. See if I can quote this without messing it up. In the strength of the farm I went down to the city of power. My search for the past of my skills found the book of the rare book. Never had mountain man been there so much as an hour, but I too had French and credentials that allowed me to look. Back at the turning from greatness to bigness in Paris, when knowledge was precious and all things had power of speech. The drawings of Diderot honored the skills that I now miss. The craftsman then spoke in the language of all in his reach. There in the city, the climax of bigness around me, I was wounded, struck by the grief of the loss of that magic. I fled through the gauntlet of mechanical marvels with pity for people, the victims, the prey of the monster mechanic. Back on the farm, I found Maker Mountain still there and was healed by the fire, the water, the earth, and the air.